Hi, my name is Chris, and welcome to the Ironforge, where we forge better games. Today I kind of want to do an overview about what you're going to need to run your first D&D adventure, utilizing some of my own knowledge as well as some of the guidelines in the new Dungeon Master's Guide. So even before you start planning your first adventure, you're going to need a couple things. First thing being, a copy of the rules in some way. Now you can access rules for free on websites like D&D Beyond. There's also the downloadable system reference document, which is a free copy of the entire rule system, primarily just for the 2014 version of 5e. There is not currently the SRD for the 2024 rules, but there should be in the near future. And outside of D&D Beyond and the SRD, which are both free options, all you need to do is make an account or download the PDF. You can also buy the core books, like I have. So I have the 2014 Player's Handbook and many other 2014 books, and I've been slowly picking up the 2024 books as they've been released. Now, you do not need the core books to play whatsoever. Just as I said, you can access the rules for free on D&D Beyond and through the system reference document. So if you're worried about having to spend a lot of money right away to get into the hobby, you don't need to. Now, the one thing you may want to drop a couple bucks on right away is a set of dice. Ideally, it's easiest if each player has at least their own set, including the Dungeon Master. However, you could probably get away with one set of dice going around the table as long as everyone's willing to share and have patience with that. But pretty cheap, inexpensive, and you want them for the game. However, there are also free dice you can just find online. Just Google dice roller, and you'll find something. The next thing you're going to need is players. Ideally, 3 to 5 is a really good spot. I find 4 and 5 is a really good sweet spot number. For a good group, it gives enough variety in the party for everyone to kind of riff off of each other. I find that having more than 5 is going to tend to be stressful, especially if it is your first time. If you're an experienced DM, you can probably manage 6, 7, or 8. However, it can become a lot, and then also the turn time that everyone has throughout the game tends to be split up because there is more people. But 3 to 5 players is generally a good amount of players that you'll need for the game, not including the Dungeon Master, of course. If able, I highly recommend having a session 0 before meeting for the first session. An overview of a session 0 is essentially just making sure everyone meets together before the game actually starts. You can create characters in it, but it's more so about making sure that everyone is on the same page about what is expected from the game, and making sure any rules, disagreements are settled upon in that session as well. I plan on doing a session 0 video later after this video, so keep an eye out for that. The other thing you're going to need is some character sheets. Now, there's a couple different variations now, especially that 5e has 2 different kinds of its own and actually multiple different variants in of itself there. You can create your own characters through the rules that you download in the SRD or buy through the core rule books, or you can find and print pre-generated character sheets that are pretty much all filled out and ready to play with. The last thing you're going to need, and what is going to be the crux of the rest of this video, is an adventure. And a big discussion with adventures that we're going to kind of describe the differences between today is going to be that of using a module and creating your own through Homebrew. So when it comes to running an adventure module, you have a couple different options. You can find an official one, such as ones through Wizards of the Coast, like this one, or you can find independent and third-party ones through companies like Kobold Press, Goodman Games, or you can find a massive amount of published adventures from individuals on DriveThruRPG, the DM's Guild. These are fantastic websites, especially if you're trying to support smaller creators who are working in the community. As I alluded to earlier, the other way is to create your own. Make your own world, make your own villages and towns that are going to have adventure hooks and places for your players to go and experience and explore. This is the other option to going about creating adventures. So let's talk about that first approach, running published adventure modules. So a lot of the advice that you will hear is that, hey, just go pick up an adventure module at your local GameStop, which is not a bad idea. You know, you can get an adventure just like this. However, a lot of the problems that arise from buying these is that, well, one, they're pretty big. There's a lot of stuff in here, right? So, first of all, it'll be a lot to pick up off the bat, especially if you're new to this. I would not honestly recommend buying an adventure module off the shelf because of their size. They are a lot to take in, a lot of information, especially if you are going to be a new game master. I would not personally recommend these right off the bat. Though most of them are fun, and I've played in adventure modules, and I've been running one for a long time myself now, there is a lot of information in there. Even if you've been running D&D before, you're going to have to take some time to sit down with it, and it can be a lot, especially if you are a first-time DM. So one of the better options for new GMs that I'm honestly going to recommend is picking up one of the starter sets. This is the Essentials Kit. You can also look at picking up either this or the Dragons of Stormwreck Isle. You can also find online on, I believe, D&D Beyond, the Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is the original 2014 starter set adventure. All of these are fantastic for new GMs. They can also serve as a great way to start off campaigns that you intend to run for longer term, if you want to expand it past just a starting adventure. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention the countless independent and third-party publishers that have put out dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of adventures for 5th edition especially. Kobold Press, Goodman Games, Ghostfire Gaming, even other content creators on YouTube such as the Dungeon Dudes, Bob Worldbuilder, many others. You can find adventures pretty much everywhere you look in the D&D sphere online. Even on Reddit you can probably find some Joe Schmo that just threw something together and put it out there. So it's very easy to find a independent third-party adventure, and I highly recommend checking a lot of them out. Alright, so you've picked up an adventure module. Doesn't matter which one. Let's say you picked up one of the big adventure books. First bit of advice, only read what you need to read to get started. Now, a lot of these adventure modules are 250 to over 300 pages. You do not always need to read the entire thing, front cover to back cover. Now, a lot of people might recommend that, and it probably would be useful. However, if you spend your entire time reading the adventure module, trying to figure out what all the nuances of the story can take, all the different plot points that are going on, you're never going to start. Read what you need to start, and then as you go through the adventure, you can read more. Now, as you're reading, you're also going to want to prepare your own notes. Take important information from what you have read so you can have it ready at the table, such as locations, NPCs, monster stat blocks, secrets and clues, things of that nature. Take those important bits from what you read to bring to the table for your in-game notes. On top of being helpful at the table, taking notes from what you read from the adventure is also going to help you retain it in your head better, thus making you a little bit more comfortable when you're running the adventure for the first time. Last major thing is you go through preparing the adventure module, adjust what doesn't fit. If there's a certain character in the module that would make more sense if it was one of your player character's dads, go for it. It doesn't have to be what the module says it is. If you prefer using orcs over the goblins that the adventure recommends, just change it. It's not going to make too much of a difference if you use orcs or goblins. So those are kind of the basics when it comes to running an adventure module. So what is the process for going about creating your own adventure? Well, let's talk about it. I do want to take a brief moment to talk about the concept of world building. Now, I'm not going to linger on this too long because it can be a very complex and giant topic to talk about, but I'm going to talk about two very simple ideas that are involved in world building. So the first being the concept of building out versus building in. So one very common one that you'll hear of is building out. That's where are you starting, only build what you're starting with, the small town the adventurers start in, and then as the adventure expands past that location, that's when you start to build the world, hence building out. You build it out as you play more. The other idea is building in. So this is where you kind of build everything on a grand scale first and then have everything very down to a minute detail. This can kind of be related to sandboxing a little bit. However, my preferred method is to combine a little bit of both. Basically, with my first homebrew world, what I did was I made a map, I drew a continent, I came up with some kingdom names, some basic history, had some basic timelines of what happened before the start of the campaign I was about to start running, and had very loose outlines for different locations in the world, such as different regions. I didn't really give them the same amount of detail that I gave the starting village. So this is where I kind of built from the outside in a little bit, but then jumped ahead to focus on the small starting point of the adventure itself. So in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, there is a chapter called Creating Adventures. In that beginning page there, it lays out the 4 steps that it recommends going through when developing your own adventure. So the first one is Lay out the premise. So this, for me, is where I really like to try to focus on where is the adventure happening? What is going on there? So as I kind of stated earlier in the building in versus out method, if the adventure is starting in a village, what's there? Who's there? What are the names of the businesses there? What are the names of the NPCs and the villagers there? These are the kind of things you want to establish when you're building the environment setting for your adventure. And this also can bleed into the overall campaign world. So in laying out the premise, one of the big things you want to do is determine where the adventure is happening. What is the small village that your adventurers are going to start in? What are the names of the NPCs and the different locations around the village called? And what's going on there? In the surrounding area, you want to think about what are the dungeons and other types of locations like strange phenomenon and other things like that happening in the area around the village. You want to lay those things out when you're coming up with the premise. This is definitely where I recommend having maps as a potential option for not only inspiration but for your own head. For me personally, it's really useful to have a map of a village. That way I can kind of envision it and help describe it better in my own head, as also when I'm describing it to the players at the table. Also, part of the premise in the DMG is what is the conflict? I kind of like to think of this as its own thing, as this is the core of your adventure. What is the thing that is going to be causing a need for heroes to rise to the occasion? This is the classic bandits have been attacking travelers on the road, or monsters have been looming dangerously close to the village at night. Ultimately, the crux of your conflict is what is going to require heroes to have to intervene to help solve the problem. Now, once you've decided what the problem is that heroes need to solve, you do need to figure out how to still draw them in nonetheless. In the in the player section of the Dungeon Master's Guide, in the Creating Adventures section, it talks a lot about hooks, so patron hooks. This could be something as simple as the town mayor or chairman hires the heroes for adventure, or something supernatural happens. Maybe they're in the inn when they hear screaming coming from one of the rooms and they run to investigate, and someone starts talking about how ghosts phase through the wall. That is an adventure hook. What is going to set the scene? Now, the other thing I like to think about is who are your players too? Now, this is something I'll talk about more in session 0, but if you have a good understanding of who's playing, you can also understand what might appeal to certain players over others. While the mayor hiring the characters might be enough incentive for some, again, money is perfectly reasonable, and a lot of people will go for it, but others might need something else. They might need appealing to their sense of justice and doing the right thing. Others might need you to potentially pull something in from their backstory. This is where certain players and characters will get more involved and more engaged into the story, and it'll also help hook them in on top of just having an interesting hook. The next part of creating an adventure is planning your encounters. So now that you have a premise set up, you have the hook that hooks the players in, what are they going to have to deal with on the adventure? And that is what we call encounters. Pretty much anything that stands between the players and achieving their goal is going to be considered an encounter. Potential encounters are pretty easily built around the core pillars of the game, that being combat, social encounters, and exploration. Social encounters are pretty much anytime they're talking to a non-player character that is being run by the GM. Exploration could be traveling through an environment or exploring a dungeon. And the most straightforward one is combat, defeating bad guys and monsters. Let's take a premise, for example. Goblins have kidnapped local townsfolk and taken them to an old crypt. What would different encounters look like in this adventure? For social interactions, it might be that the local barkeep knows where the crypt is, but the players need to convince him of it because he's so horrified of even speaking about it, hearing the horrible legends that have come from the dead that dwell within. Exploration could include having to crawl through the ancient spider forest that the goblins had gone through to get to the crypt, and now the players have to follow them through that forest. And then combat could be ambushing the goblins at the front of the crypt. Now that you've set out your premise, you've hooked your players in, and you've planned some encounters, how is it all going to come to a close? For example, premise, it could be that the players have to battle the goblins with their goblin boss all at the same time, while the townsfolk are also held at knife point. This can be an exciting climactic moment. Important thing to think about after the climax, though, is what is the resolution? I highly recommend when thinking about the climax, and the resolution specifically, you think about the why. Why did the goblins take these townsfolk? Why did they take them to this crypt specifically? Was someone paying the goblins? Were they trying to complete a religious sacrifice? Or were they being manipulated by someone else to do their bidding? This why can have a closed answer, and that's totally fine. Maybe these goblins just were jerks and wanted to kidnap some people, and that's not good. So you had to stop them, and that's it. But if this first adventure will possibly lead into a longer campaign, you'll want to think about the why a little bit more, because it could open the door to further adventures down the line. Think of this resolution and why as potentially leaving a trail for the players to follow further down the campaign. And lastly, you want to think about rewards. What's the loot? What kind of magic items are they going to get, if any at all? Also, think about information as a reward as well. Like I said earlier, if someone was paying those goblins, who is the person signing their letter as RS? Who is that? Information can be just as exciting as loot, but don't forget about loot either. So all throughout this video, I've talked about the two big approaches that exist primarily when creating adventures. That being using an adventure module or doing something homebrew and creating it yourself. However, my secret third approach that I mentioned, it's actually not secret at all. Pretty much everyone does it and knows about it already. But it's combining these two things together. The idea is to steal from published adventures and use it in your own game in your own way. Take maps from published adventures such as town maps, NPC descriptions, locations, put them in your own world that you've created. You can totally superimpose something from a pre-written module and put it into your own world. As I showed earlier, this book here, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, I've been running this for the past 5 years and have pretty much superimposed it into my own homebrew world despite using the module as a skeleton for the adventure. I simply took the map of Icewind Dale, put it in a location that made sense in my homebrew world, and made it my own. It pretty much ended up becoming a lot of homebrew ideas on top of an adventure module that was the canvas of the adventure. Like I said earlier too, you can use adventure modules as kicking off points. When I mentioned earlier, the Essentials Kit, you can use that as a starting adventure for your longer term campaign that'll eventually become mostly homebrew. These are all things that are totally fine to do, and honestly, it makes being a DM a lot easier too, because then you don't have to come up with everything on your own. Through doing this process, you can take ideas from two different things, smash them together, and then turn them sideways, and it becomes their own thing that you've created. For example, take one part of a dungeon map and take another part of a different dungeon map, smash them together, you now have your own custom original dungeon that you've made. You can swap out different aspects of an NPC as well. Perhaps they're written as an elf, but you really like to work with dwarves. Make them a dwarf. Ultimately, this will lead to creating a lot of your own original ideas, taking from things that already exist and melding them with what's in your head already. So hopefully this video has provided you enough of the basics to kind of get a understanding as to what you're going to need when going into prepping your own adventures for D&D. I know it sounds like a lot, but as long as you have an idea in your head and you start writing it out, following the steps in this video, you will be able to make a fun adventure for you and your friends to play. A little bit of parting advice, if I may, though. Like I said, this sounds like a lot, but as I kind of stated earlier, the simpler you can start, the easier it is going to be to start. The key to making a good adventure is to making sure that it is just enough, so that way it is malleable to the X factor that is going to be your players. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and if you have any additional advice you want to throw out there, leave them down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching this video, and see you next time on The Iron Forge.